The air in Dr. Aris Thorne's bioengineering lab was thick with the acrid scent of ozone and something metallic, like burnt circuitry mixed with a faint, cloying sweetness I couldn't quite place. My boots crunched on shattered glass and pulverized composites, each step a testament to the destructive force that had ripped through this space. What had once been a pristine, high-security research facility was now a testament to controlled chaos. Reinforced walls were buckled inward, advanced consoles melted into grotesque sculptures, and the ceiling panels hung like ragged teeth. Catastrophic event, the lead detective, a man with tired eyes and a perpetually furrowed brow, stated flatly, gesturing broadly with a gloved hand. Initial assessment points to a self-contained explosion. Maybe a volatile reaction. Maybe suicide. Thorne was working on some revolutionary stuff, highly experimental. I knelt beside what remained of a primary workstation. The monitors were black, their screens spiderwebbed with cracks, but the underlying frame of the desk, a heavy-duty alloy, was warped and pitted in a distinctive way. Not just from heat, but from something else. The detective continued, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous, damaged space. Security logs show no forced entry. No one else was authorized on site at the time. The blast doors sealed perfectly, contained the damage to this single chamber. Clean, if you can call this clean. Clean. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. My gaze drifted from the detective to the floor, where faint outlines of Thorne's body had been marked before removal. The burn patterns around that spot were intense, almost surgical in their focus, suggesting an epicenter. But the surrounding devastation, while severe, felt too neat. Like a stage magician's trick, designed to draw the eye away from the true mechanism. My fingers, encased in nitrile, traced a peculiar scorch mark on the edge of a surviving access panel. It was small, no larger than my thumbprint, but the discoloration was different from the widespread charring. Deeper, almost iridescent in its blackness, and strangely symmetrical. It didn't look like an accidental flare-up. It looked like a specific point of extreme, localized heat, applied with intent. Any residue analysis done on the blast radius yet? I asked, my voice low. The detective shook his head. Still processing. Fire marshal thinks it was an internal pressure buildup. Could be anything with Thorne's work, new compounds, exotic materials. He was a genius, a recluse. Who knows what he was cooking up in here? I stood, my eyes sweeping over the remnants of Thorne's life's work. This wasn't some backroom garage experiment. This was a fortress of scientific endeavor, equipped with safeguards that should have prevented any accidental catastrophic event. And if it was suicide, why this particular method? Why such an elaborate, destructive exit? The deliberate containment, the lack of external involvement, it all screamed of a carefully constructed narrative, a story meant to be believed. But my gut, a seasoned instrument honed over years of picking through the wreckage of human failings, whispered a different tale. I spent another hour in the lab, documenting, photographing, and collecting samples, particularly from that anomalous scorch mark and the surrounding debris. Every shattered piece, every melted component, every microscopic speck held a piece of the truth. The detective left, satisfied that his initial assessment held water. I wasn't. Later, in the sterile silence of the crime lab evidence processing clean room, the air hummed with the soft thrum of filtration systems. I sat hunched over a powerful stereo microscope, the anomalous panel fragment from Thorne's lab clamped securely beneath the lens. The fluorescent lights above cast a harsh, unforgiving glow on the polished steel surfaces and my gloved hands. Around me, various instruments stood ready, mass spectrometers, electron microscopes, gas chromatographs, all tools in my relentless pursuit of objective truth. I adjusted the focus, bringing the peculiar burn mark into sharp relief. Under magnification, the surface of the alloy revealed crystalline structures I hadn't expected. The heat had been intense enough to recrystallize the metal itself, but the pattern wasn't consistent with a general explosion. It was too precise, too localized. And then I saw it. Embedded within the heart of the deepest jar, almost invisible to the naked eye, was a minuscule fleck. It wasn't metal, not a composite from the lab, and certainly not organic matter. Its color was a muted, almost transparent gray, and its edges were sharp, angular, unlike any residue from a typical thermal event. It was foreign. And its composition, even at this initial glance, suggested something incredibly resilient, something designed to withstand extreme temperatures. I carefully used a microtweezers to extract the fleck, placing it onto a pristine glass slide. My breath hitched, a silent, internal alarm bell sounding. This wasn't a byproduct of an accident. This wasn't a residue from Thorne's experimental compounds. This was a signature. A signature left by something that had initiated the intense, localized heat, something that had been designed to cause precise, devastating damage. The initial narrative of accident or suicide evaporated like mist in a desert sun. What had happened in Dr. Aris Thorne's lab was no miscalculation. It was a meticulously executed act, and the killer had gone to extraordinary lengths to bury the evidence in plain sight. They were wrong. I stood, my eyes sweeping over the remnants of Thorne's life's work. This wasn't some backroom garage experiment. And if it was suicide, why this particular method? Why? The questions gnawed at me, a persistent itch I knew only meticulous examination could scratch. I'd spent enough time sifting through wreckage to recognize the difference between chaos and calculated destruction. This felt like the latter. The air here was filtered, scrubbed of every stray particle, a stark contrast to the dust and debris I'd just left behind. The room was cold, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones, sharpening the senses. The chief examiner, a man whose hands moved with the precision of a master artisan despite the grim nature of his work, stood over a gurney. Thorne's remains, or what was left of them, lay beneath a white sheet. A colleague was meticulously bagging fragments of clothing and personal effects on an adjacent table, each piece handled with gloved reverence. Reed, the chief examiner nodded, his voice a low rumble. "We've got the preliminary findings." He peeled back the sheet, revealing the grim reality. The sight was never easy, but my focus was clinical, dissecting the visual information. The external burns are extensive, consistent with a high-temperature, rapid-onset event, he began, his gloved finger hovering over a specific area of scorched tissue. However, what's interesting is the pattern. While widespread, there are distinct focal points of extreme heat, almost surgical in their intensity, particularly around the chest and head. Not what I'd expect from a general lab explosion, which usually distributes energy more uniformly. My brow furrowed. So, not a simple blast radius? Exactly. And then there's this. He pointed to a small, discolored area on Thorne's left forearm, near the wrist.
localized contusion, pre-mortem.
Not severe enough to be fatal, but definitely occurred before the main event. And it doesn't align with any impact points from flying debris we've mapped so far. Almost looks like a grip mark, or a struggle. A knot tightened in my gut. A contusion before the explosion. This wasn't just an accident or a self-inflicted act. This was starting to look like a fight. Internal examination is still underway, the chief examiner continued, but early indications point to some internal trauma inconsistent with the general blast force. Specific organ damage that suggests a direct, focused impact, again, before the widespread thermal injury. We're talking about impact trauma, Reed, not pressure wave damage. He covered Thorne's body again, turning to a tray of personal effects. These were recovered from his person, mostly shielded by the protective gear he was wearing. A charred data chip, a singed wrist communicator. And this. He picked up a small, almost imperceptible flake of material with tweezers. It was metallic, shimmering faintly under the bright lights, no bigger than a grain of sand. He dropped it into a small, sterile evidence file. We found a few of these, embedded in his clothing, and a couple in the superficial layers of his skin, near the wrist contusion. They don't appear to be from any of the lab equipment we've identified, nor are they typical environmental dust. I leaned closer, my eyes scanning the minute particle. It possessed an unusual sheen, a subtle iridescence that hinted at a complex composition. Have you run an initial spectrographic analysis? Working on it. But my gut tells me it's exotic. Not something you find in a standard bioengineering lab or even a common urban setting. It's unique. Unique. That word resonated. It was the whisper of a fingerprint, an anomaly in a sea of expected carnage. My suspicions, once a quiet hum, now pulsed with renewed energy. Thorne hadn't just died, he'd been attacked, and then his death had been meticulously disguised. Back in my small, cramped office, the stack of preliminary reports felt heavier than usual. The chief examiner's words echoed in my mind: localized contusion, internal trauma inconsistent with blast, exotic metallic dust. I pulled up the files on Thorne's professional circle. The first name that jumped out was that of the rival scientist, a man known for his aggressive pursuit of grant funding and a history of public disputes with Thorne over intellectual property. Their rivalry was legendary in certain academic circles, a bitter contest of egos and groundbreaking research. Thorne's latest project, whatever it was, had been shrouded in secrecy, fueling speculation that he was on the verge of something monumental, something that could eclipse all his competitors. The rival scientist had everything to lose if Thorne succeeded, and perhaps everything to gain if he failed spectacularly. The motive was clear, if generic. Then there was the former research assistant, Maya. Her file painted a picture of a brilliant but volatile mind, dismissed by Thorne 6 months prior. Thorne was notoriously possessive of his research, his methods often described as autocratic. The former research assistant had reportedly left with a furious promise of retribution, convinced Thorne had stolen her contributions to an earlier project. She knew the lab's layout, its security protocols, perhaps even its vulnerabilities, better than almost anyone outside of Thorne himself. And she certainly had reason to feel wronged. Two distinct paths. A rival driven by professional ambition, or a former protege fueled by personal vengeance. Both had knowledge of Thorne and his fortress. Both had motive. I stared at the screen, the names blurring into a mosaic of potential culpability. The metallic dust, the premortem injuries, these weren't random. This wasn't just about finding who killed Thorne, it was about understanding the specific, intricate mechanism of his death, and what that unique trace element would tell me about the killer. The tension in the air was palpable, a silent promise of the dangerous ground I was about to tread. His history with Thorne was a tangled knot of public spats and patent disputes, a simmering feud that had often threatened to boil over. But the paper trail, however contentious, was just that, paper. The real answers, I knew, often lay hidden in the digital ether. A call from a colleague in digital forensics confirmed my next move. "We've got Thorne's primary research server ready, read. You'll want to see this." I made my way through the labyrinthine corridors of the facility, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, until I reached the designated area. Here, the air hummed with filtered efficiency, a sterile environment where even dust was an unwelcome intruder. I donned the required scrubs, hairnet, and shoe covers, feeling the gentle pressure of the positive pressure air system as I entered the antechamber. Inside, the room was bathed in the cool glow of multiple monitors. My colleague, a meticulous data specialist, gestured to a bank of screens displaying intricate lines of code and complex data structures. "This is Thorne's main server, straight from the lab. It's a beast." The screen in front of me displayed what appeared to be genetic sequencing data, a dizzying array of nucleotides and protein markers. "What exactly am I looking at?" I asked, leaning closer. "Advanced genetic sequencing," the specialist replied, his voice hushed, almost reverent. "Specifically, a project codenamed Genesis. From what we can piece together, Thorne was working on cellular regeneration at an unprecedented scale. Potentially, a cure for aging, or a way to engineer resilience against any known pathogen." He paused, adjusting his glasses. "Or, in the wrong hands, a blueprint for something far more sinister. Think targeted bioweaponry, read. Something that could rewrite the very definition of global health, for better or for worse." My gaze sharpened, the implications hitting me like a cold wave. I navigated through the directories, my fingers flying over the keyboard. I started with the access logs, looking for anomalies, anything out of place in the tightly controlled environment of Thorne's digital workspace. "Here," I said, pointing to a series of timestamps. "These don't make sense. Multiple login attempts from an unknown IP address, all within the last week. And then, a successful login, but the user ID. It's Thorne's." "We saw that," the specialist confirmed. "Highly unusual. It looks like a brute force attack followed by a successful impersonation. Or Thorne himself was logging in from an unregistered device." I shook my head slowly. He wouldn't use an unregistered device for something this sensitive. Not Thorne. He was obsessive about security. My mind raced, connecting the dots to the rival scientist's aggressive tactics, but this felt more sophisticated than a simple hack. I delved deeper, sifting through deleted files and system backups. That's when I found it. A cluster of project files, labeled with the same Genesis codename, had been recently deleted. Not just deleted, but overwritten multiple times, a sophisticated attempt at data sanitization. Yet, fragments remained, ghosts in the machine. Using a specialized recovery tool, I began to piece them back together.
"Look at this," I muttered, pointing to the screen. The recovered fragments showed a different aspect of the Genesis project.
While the main files focused on regeneration, these deleted ones seemed to explore the degradation of specific genetic markers. A mirror image of the main research, but with a destructive intent. "Someone wanted this gone," the specialist observed, his brow furrowed. "And they knew exactly what to target. This isn't just a random wipe, it's surgical." My internal alarm bells were ringing. This wasn't a lab accident. This wasn't even just suicide. This was a deliberate, calculated act. Either Thorne himself was trying to bury something damning, or an external party, intimately familiar with his work, had infiltrated his systems and erased a critical piece of the puzzle. The tension in the room thickened, palpable, as the gravity of the discovery settled over us. Just then, the door to the clean room hissed open, and Maya, Thorne's assistant, stepped inside, dressed in the same sterile attire. Her eyes, usually bright and observant, were shadowed, her movements hesitant.
"He told me, if anything ever happened, to give it only to you."
She extended the drive, her hand trembling slightly. I took the drive, my fingers brushing against hers.
"Not for weeks before. Before he died. He was paranoid.
He kept saying someone was watching him, that his research was being compromised. He changed all his passwords, then changed them again. He even started carrying a small burner phone, convinced his main line was tapped." Her voice cracked. He thought they were coming for him. And given what I was seeing on the screens, his fear was entirely justified.
The data manipulation, the targeted wipe, and now Maya's unsettling remarks, the picture was becoming clearer, and far more dangerous.
The rival scientist might have had motive, but this level of digital sophistication pointed to something far deeper, far more organized. Someone had been hunting Thorne, not for his patents, but for the very core of his world-changing, or world-ending, research. Here, every surface gleamed, every tool lay precisely in its designated place. I pulled on a fresh pair of nitrile gloves, the material stretching taut over my knuckles, and adjusted the magnification on the electron microscope. The microscopic trace, the one I'd found clinging to a scorched panel near Thorne's workstation, was barely visible to the naked eye. Under the lens, it resembled a minute, iridescent shard, no bigger than a grain of pollen. My initial thought had been some kind of exotic metal, a byproduct of Thorne's advanced experiments. But the burn pattern, the way it had resisted complete incineration, suggested something else entirely. I carefully positioned the sample under the spectral analyzer. The machine whirred to life, a laser beam, invisible but potent, danced across the fragment. Each spike represented an element, a fingerprint of the material's composition. My eyes, trained to spot anomalies, scanned the evolving data. Standard lab materials, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, they appeared as expected. Then, a cluster of peaks emerged, tight and distinct, in a region of the spectrum I didn't immediately recognize. I cross-referenced the signature against the lab's extensive material database. The system churned, sifting through millions of known compounds. Time stretched, punctuated only by the soft clicks of the keyboard as I refined the search parameters, narrowing the focus to synthetic polymers.
A match. The screen flashed green, displaying the identification, a rare, synthetic polymer. Its chemical structure was complex, designed for extreme durability and heat resistance, far beyond anything I'd ever encountered in a typical research setting.
The database entry detailed its primary use, high-end industrial applications, particularly in specialized manufacturing processes where resilience to extreme environments was paramount. It wasn't something you'd find lying around a bioengineer's lab, even one as advanced as Thorne's.
My jaw tightened. This wasn't an accidental contaminant. This was a specific material, deliberately introduced, or perhaps, deliberately left behind. The implications hit me with the force of a physical blow. The catastrophic lab accident narrative, the one everyone had been so quick to embrace, was now in tatters. Suicide was out of the question. This polymer, with its unique properties, was a signature. A calling card. I ran a quick search on companies known to utilize or manufacture this specific polymer. The results were immediate and pointed. Omnicorp. Omnicorp, a vast conglomerate with tentacles in everything from aerospace to pharmaceuticals, and a notorious reputation for aggressive R&D. They had been one of Thorne's primary funding sources, a fact I'd noted in the initial case file but had dismissed as standard corporate backing. Now, it felt like a lead, sharp and undeniable. Thorne hadn't just been paranoid, he'd been caught in a web, and this polymer was a strand. I spent the next hour reviewing Omnicorp's public filings, their corporate structure, and their involvement with Thorne's research. The details were sparse, deliberately vague, but the connection was undeniable. They had a vested interest in Thorne's groundbreaking work, an interest that now felt predatory. The following morning, I found myself in the sleek, minimalist lobby of Omnicorp's downtown tower. The air conditioning was set to an Arctic chill, and the hushed tones of the receptionist felt designed to intimidate. I stated my purpose, and within minutes, the corporate liaison appeared. Detective Reed, the liaison, greeted me, his voice smooth, almost oily. He was a man in his late 40s, immaculately dressed in a charcoal suit, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We've been expecting you. Please, follow me." He led me to a conference room overlooking the city, offering a glass of sparkling water before I could even settle into the ergonomic chair. "Anything we can do to assist in the investigation into Dr. Thorne's unfortunate passing, absolutely anything," he chirped, his hands clasped neatly on the polished table. Such a tragedy. A brilliant mind, truly. "I'm looking into the materials used in Dr. Thorne's lab," I began, cutting straight to the point. "Specifically, a synthetic polymer with extreme heat resistance. Our analysis suggests it's unique, used in high-end industrial applications." The liaison's smile didn't falter, but a flicker, a momentary tension, tightened the corners of his eyes. "Ah, yes. Dr. Thorne was always pushing the boundaries of material science. We provided him with a wide array of experimental components, of course, as part of our grant agreement. We believe in empowering our researchers with the best possible tools. Do you have a record of every material supplied to Dr. Thorne's lab?" I pressed, leaning forward slightly. "A detailed inventory, perhaps, that lists this specific polymer?" He nodded, a practiced, confident gesture. "Naturally. Our records are meticulous. I can assure you, we maintain full transparency with all our funded projects. I'll have our internal team compile a comprehensive list of all materials supplied to Dr. Thorne's facility. It might take a day or two, but we'll get it to you promptly." His eagerness to cooperate felt. Theatrical. Too perfect. He was offering exactly what I asked for, but I sensed a deliberate misdirection, a controlled narrative. He was giving me a list, but not necessarily the truth behind the list. And Omnicorp's direct involvement with the research itself? I continued. Was there a specific team overseeing Dr. Thorne's progress? Any individuals who had direct access to his lab, outside of his immediate staff? He paused, a beat too long, before resuming his overly helpful demeanor. Our oversight was primarily administrative, detective. We provided funding, resources, and strategic guidance. Thorne was a genius, fiercely independent. We respected his need for autonomy. As for access, our security protocols are stringent. Only authorized personnel, mainly Dr. Thorne and his core team, had regular access. Any Omnicorp representative requiring entry would have been logged and escorted. And who were those representatives? I asked. I'll include that in the compiled report, he said, his smile unwavering. Full disclosure, detective. We are committed to finding the truth. I watched him closely, noting the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way his gaze darted just past my left ear. He was giving me information, yes, but he was also building a wall, a carefully constructed facade of helpfulness designed to obscure rather than reveal. The polymer was a key, and Omnicorp held the lock. But this liaison, with his polished words and eager assurances, was not just a gatekeeper, he was a master of misdirection. My gut told me the real answers wouldn't be found in any report he compiled. They were hidden in the gaps, in the things he didn't say. The polymer shards, no larger than grains of coarse salt, lay scattered across the pristine white surface of my examination tray. I leaned closer, my eye pressed to the eyepiece of the stereo microscope, adjusting the focus with a practiced hand. The light, intense and cool, illuminated the intricate structure of the synthetic material. The chief of security had tried to steer me toward a dead end, a generic explanation about industrial polymers. But under this magnification, the story changed. This wasn't some off-the-shelf plastic. The molecular chains, visible in their ordered complexity, spoke of bespoke engineering. There were specific inclusions, almost like microscopic markers, embedded within the matrix. It was a signature, subtle but undeniable. This polymer was manufactured for a very particular purpose, by a very particular entity. Omnicy, the company Thorne had been associated with, was the obvious candidate, but I needed definitive proof, a chemical fingerprint to match. I spent another hour, cataloging the unique characteristics, running comparison scans against a database of specialized materials. The results were tantalizingly close, pointing to a family of advanced compounds known for their extreme durability and heat resistance, properties that align perfectly with the destructive environment of Thorne's lab post-explosion. The specific variant, however, remained elusive, just beyond the reach of a direct match in the public domain. This suggested proprietary technology, tightly controlled. My determination hardened. I was getting closer. Leaving the sterile confines of the clean room, the outside world felt jarringly loud. The late afternoon sun cast long, angular shadows across the parking lot. I was halfway to my vehicle when the roar of an engine ripped through the air. A delivery van, its side panel emblazoned with a faded logo, shot out from behind a line of parked cars, veering sharply into my path.
I froze, my hand instinctively reaching for the door handle of my own vehicle, a fraction of a second too slow. The van's front bumper scraped past my jacket, the rush of displaced air chilling my skin. The driver, a blur behind tinted glass, didn't slow, didn't swerve back. He just kept going, disappearing around the corner with a screech of tires. My breath hitched. It was too close to be an accident. The parking lot was almost empty, and the van had come from an impossible angle, not the main thoroughfare. Someone knew I was getting close. I returned to my small, cluttered office, the near miss replaying in my mind. I needed to cross-reference my polymer findings with Omnisea's known material patents. The company's public records would only offer a glimpse, but perhaps a deeper dive into their research papers or even their competitors' patent disputes could yield something. As I reached for the secure hard drive where I kept my most sensitive case files, my fingers brushed against the spine of a rarely used technical manual. It was slightly askew. I always kept my desk meticulously organized, a habit born of necessity and a preference for order. The manual was one of a stack, arranged by height. This one was out of place by less than a millimeter, a detail only I would notice. My gaze swept the room. Nothing else seemed disturbed. No forced entry, no obvious signs of a search, but the manual. I pulled it out, then slid it back, studying the dust motes on the shelf. A faint, almost imperceptible smudge, a thumbprint that wasn't mine, marred the pristine surface beneath where the manual had rested. Someone had been in my office. Someone subtle. Someone who knew how I worked, how I organized my space. The message was clear: I am watching you. The air in the office suddenly felt heavy, suffocating. This wasn't just a corporate cover-up. This was active obstruction, a direct threat. I picked up my phone, dialing Maya's number. Now. It's urgent. I kept my voice level, but the urgency must have bled through. I think I need to talk to you too, she confessed, her voice barely audible. I saw something. Before it happened. I was scared to say anything. I drove to her small apartment, the city lights blurring into streaks of color. The tension in the car was a palpable thing, a physical weight. She led me to her cramped living room, offering me a glass of water she didn't touch herself. It was a few nights before Thorne died, she began, twisting her hands in her lap. I was working late, finishing up a report. I sometimes stayed past midnight, when it was quiet. The lab was usually empty then, just me and Thorne, sometimes. But this night, I saw someone else. She paused, taking a shaky breath. I was leaving, and I saw a figure, silhouetted against the emergency exit light down the hall from Thorne's lab. I couldn't see their face, not at all. But they had a key card. I heard the beep of the reader, and the lab door clicked open. They went inside. Thorne's lab? I pressed, my voice low. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Yes. I just froze. I thought maybe it was a colleague, but they were so secretive. And Thorne never mentioned anyone else working late like that. I didn't want to get involved, didn't want to make trouble. I just hurried out. I told myself it was nothing. But after what happened? Her voice trailed off, a sob catching in her throat.
An unknown individual, accessing Thorne's high-security lab after hours, carrying a mysterious case, just days before the explosion. My mind raced, connecting the dots, the unique polymer, the security chief's obfuscation, the deliberate accidents, and now Maya's terrifying confession. This wasn't just murder. This was a meticulously planned operation, executed by someone with intimate knowledge of Thorne's work, the lab's security, and perhaps even my own investigative methods. The threat wasn't just to the case, it was to me. I sat hunched over a console, my fingers flying across the keyboard, the only sound apart from the machinery being the rhythmic clicking of keys. Days had bled into nights since the lab incident, and the only constant was my relentless pursuit of the truth buried beneath the layers of engineered chaos. My focus was absolute, tunnel vision honed by hours of sifting through Thorne's digital footprint. The sheer volume of data was staggering: security camera footage, access card logs, environmental control system metrics, and the diagnostics from every piece of bespoke equipment in his high-security research space. A colleague, a data forensics specialist, sat at an adjacent station, equally immersed. My gaze was fixed on the environmental controls, a hunch gnawing at me since I'd first stepped into the ravaged lab. Pull up the atmospheric pressure logs for sectors 3 and 4, 24 hours prior to the incident, I instructed the specialist, my voice hoarse. Cross-reference with the oxygen and inert gas mix readings. The specialist's fingers danced across their own keyboard. A new window populated on my main screen, displaying a complex graph. For hours, I'd been chasing anomalies, searching for the discordant note in Thorne's meticulously orchestrated environment. The initial reports had painted a picture of a catastrophic equipment failure, a spontaneous combustion event. But the burn patterns, the specific residues, they hadn't quite aligned with the official narrative. My eyes scanned the fluctuating lines on the graph. There it was. A subtle dip in atmospheric pressure, barely noticeable, occurring approximately an hour before the main event. It wasn't significant enough to trip any alarms, but it was there. My brow furrowed. Now, overlay the ventilation system's fan speeds and valve timings for the same period. The specialist executed the command. Another set of lines appeared, intertwining with the first. And then, the pattern solidified. The pressure dip coincided precisely with a momentary, unscheduled decrease in exhaust fan speed, immediately followed by an increase in the influx of a specific inert gas mixture. Not a flood, not a sudden surge, but a calculated, incremental adjustment. It was like watching a ghost hand slowly turn a dial. My internal thoughts raced, piecing together the fragments. Someone was fine-tuning the air, preparing the stage. Now, the specific equipment diagnostics, I said, my voice barely a whisper, a grim satisfaction beginning to bloom in my chest. Focus on the plasma reactor and the adjacent gas chromatograph. Show me there. Operational parameters, specifically the heating elements and pressure regulators, for the 30 minutes leading up to the incident. The data filled the screen. For most of the time, the equipment ran within Thorne's established, rigorous parameters. Then, 23 minutes before the explosion, a pressure regulator on the gas chromatograph showed a minute, almost imperceptible, spike. 8 minutes later, the plasma reactor's internal temperature briefly exceeded its programmed maximum, by a mere 2 degrees Celsius, before quickly stabilizing. A negligible blip. But my mind instantly connected these digital tremors to the physical evidence. The specific scorching on the chromatograph's casing, the localized stress fractures on the reactor's containment vessel. Individually, they were small anomalies. It was primed. I directed the specialist to pull up the external security logs, specifically looking for any remote access attempts to the lab's network during the critical period. The packets contained commands that correlated perfectly with the atmospheric and equipment manipulations I just uncovered. "This wasn't an accident," I stated, the words cutting through the sterile quiet. "This was a precisely engineered event." My gaze swept across the glowing data, the intricate dance of numbers and graphs that now told a terrifyingly coherent story. A multi-stage manipulation. First, the atmospheric composition was subtly altered, creating an unstable environment. Then, specific equipment was remotely triggered, minor adjustments that, when combined with the primed atmosphere, created a domino effect, leading to a catastrophic reaction. The specialist looked up. The out-of-sequence ventilation adjustments, the minor temperature and pressure spikes, they were the fingerprints. Someone knew Thorne's protocols inside and out. And they did it all from a distance. The implication hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was a calculated assassination, executed with surgical precision, designed to erase Thorne and his groundbreaking research without leaving a trace of the true perpetrator. The killer wasn't just smart, they were intimately connected to Thorne's world, a ghost in the machine who had turned the very tools of his genius against him. The mystery hadn't just deepened, it had become exponentially more dangerous. The implication hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. This wasn't a random act of violence. The killer wasn't just smart, they were meticulous, almost obsessive. And that level of effort, I knew, pointed to something far deeper than simple corporate espionage or a rival's jealousy over a patent. My gloved hands moved across Thorne's primary workstation drive, its casing open, circuits exposed. The drive itself had been recovered from the lab's wreckage, miraculously intact, shielded by its own hardened enclosure and Thorne's foresight. Or perhaps, the killer's oversight. I had spent hours sifting through Thorne's digital life, mapping his professional network, cross-referencing his correspondence, looking for any anomaly, any deviation from the expected pattern of a reclusive genius. Most of his files were meticulously organized, almost clinically so, each project nested within clearly labeled directories. But the very precision of it made me wary. Too perfect. Too clean. My mind kept circling back to the murder method. The precise manipulation of the lab environment to simulate a catastrophic accident, the surgical removal of specific data points, the deliberate obscuring of Thorne's last moments. It wasn't just about acquiring his research, it was about stopping him. Preventing the completion of something, or, more critically, its public release. If the killer merely wanted the data, a simple download and a clean escape would have sufficed. The elaborate staging suggested a deeper, more profound fear. A fear of what Thorne might do with his findings, not just what he had found. The forensic software hummed, rendering a visual representation of the drive's architecture. It looked like a sprawling city grid, interconnected and complex. Most of it was familiar territory, but there was a section, a small, almost invisible cluster of data blocks, that kept drawing my attention. It was tucked away, not in a hidden partition, but cleverly fragmented and interspersed within system files, disguised as benign operating system remnants. A ghost in the machine. Got something? The lead technician,
a quiet woman with sharp, focused eyes, asked from her own workstation across the room. She hadn't looked up, her fingers flying across her keyboard, but she sensed my shift in posture. "Maybe," I murmured, zooming in on the cluster. "They're not deleted, not corrupted. Just unindexed. Like breadcrumbs scattered through a forest, leading nowhere obvious." It took another hour of careful reconstruction, piecing together the digital jigsaw puzzle. My fingers tapped rhythmically on the keyboard, executing commands, cross-referencing algorithms. The fragments slowly coalesced into a single, encrypted file. The file name was innocuous, backup_log_2024.dat. Too generic for Thorne's usual precise naming conventions. My gut clenched. This was it. The encryption was formidable. I ran several decryption protocols, watching the progress bar crawl. The tension in the clean room thickened, palpable, even to the technician, who now occasionally glanced my way. Thorne was a brilliant bioengineer, not a cybersecurity expert, but he clearly understood the need for extreme secrecy. This wasn't a simple password. This was a multi-layered, proprietary cipher. A small window popped up, displaying the contents of the file. It wasn't a data archive. Thorne's voice, though written, was clear, his words precise and burdened. Entry 17. My work on the cellular regeneration matrix has reached a critical juncture. The potential for therapeutic application is immense, truly world-changing. But the implications, they weigh heavily. I discovered inconsistencies in Omnicorp's financial records related to my project. A separate, undocumented fund. I'd begun tracing it. My breath hitched. Omnicorp. The corporate giant that had funded Thorne's research, the entity whose representatives had been so quick to declare the incident an accident. I scrolled down, my eyes devouring the text. Entry 22, the clandestine funding isn't for my project. It's for something else entirely. A parallel initiative. They're developing a weaponized variant of my core principles, twisting the regenerative matrix into something destructive. Not healing. Not creation. Destruction on a cellular level. And they're using my research as a smokescreen. My jaw tightened. Weaponized. This wasn't just about stolen research. This was about erasing a dangerous truth. Entry 29, I cannot stand by. My conscience demands action. Omnicorp intends to deploy this. This Project Chimera, as they call it, for purposes I find abhorrent. They believe my silence is guaranteed by my contract. They are mistaken. I have gathered enough evidence. I intend to expose their treachery, not just to the scientific community, but to the world. The press conference is scheduled for next Tuesday. They won't see it coming. Next Tuesday. Thorne had been killed the Friday before. He was days away from exposing them. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with a chilling finality. The elaborate staging of his death wasn't just to hide the killer, it was to ensure Thorne's exposure never saw the light of day. Permanently. And they had succeeded. I wasn't just investigating a murder anymore. I was unearthing a conspiracy, one that reached into the highest echelons of a powerful corporation, involving a weapon of unimaginable destructive potential.
Thorne's final act was an attempt to save countless lives. My next act had to be to finish what he started. But first, I had to find the killer who had stopped him. And now, I was digging them up. Fluorescent lights, shielded to prevent any stray UV interference, cast a stark, unforgiving glow on the array of monitors before me. Each screen displayed a different facet of the research facility's digital footprint, access logs, biometric entry data, internal network traffic, and employee profiles. The room was designed for absolute control, every particle accounted for, every variable minimized. It was the perfect environment for dissecting a crime orchestrated with surgical precision. This wasn't a random act. It was a symphony of destruction, conducted by someone who knew every instrument in Aris Thorne's unique orchestra. I had already filtered out hundreds of names, anyone without the top-tier clearance or the specific engineering certifications required to even comprehend the intricacies of Thorne's setup. That left me with a shortlist, a mere handful of individuals who possessed both the access and the expertise. I pulled up their detailed profiles, cross-referencing their academic specializations, their project histories, even their vacation schedules around the time of the incident. It was like searching for a specific grain of sand on a vast beach, only I knew the grain had a unique magnetic signature. The list narrowed further, each name a potential betrayer. There was the lead systems architect, brilliant but with a documented aversion to risk. A senior research engineer, whose expertise was undeniable, but whose recent performance reviews flagged him as overly cautious. And then there was the Omnicorp liaison, David Thorne. No relation to Aris Thorne, a detail I'd noted early on, a small, inconsequential fact until now. I clicked on his profile, a digital dossier that stretched back years. David Thorne wasn't just a corporate representative, his role was to facilitate communication and resource allocation between Omnicorp and Aris Thorne's highly sensitive projects. He had unfettered access, a deep understanding of the research, and, crucially, a comprehensive grasp of the facility's infrastructure. But so did the others. What set him apart? I scrolled through his professional history, past the polished corporate summaries and impressive project successes. My fingers hovered over an entry from nearly 2 decades prior, a brief, almost dismissive mention of a specialized consulting role for a government contractor. The language was vague, deliberately so, a red flag to my investigative instincts. I initiated a deeper search, leveraging a few restricted databases I had access to, peeling back layers of corporate obfuscation. The truth began to surface, piece by unsettling piece. The specialized consulting wasn't engineering or business strategy. It was a cover, a euphemism for a background in covert operations. Not military, not direct intelligence gathering, but a shadowy world of corporate infiltration and asset protection, a term often used to describe the retrieval or neutralization of intellectual property deemed strategically vital. The cold precision of the lab's sabotage suddenly made a chilling kind of sense. The killer hadn't just understood the systems, they had understood how to exploit vulnerabilities with the calculated detachment of a trained operative. The breakthrough. The potential world-changing implications. And then, the connection. I dug further into David Thorne's past, specifically searching for any involvement with intellectual property disputes or corporate espionage cases. A forgotten news article from a decade ago flickered onto the screen, buried deep in an archive. A major scandal involving the theft of groundbreaking bioengineering schematics from a rival corporation.
The inside man was never formally identified, the case quietly settled out of court, but the article hinted at a sophisticated, untraceable data exfiltration. A key figure mentioned in the periphery of that old report was a project facilitator named David Thorne. The pieces slammed together with brutal force. A man with a background in covert operations, specializing in intellectual property, with direct, intimate access to Aris Thorne's groundbreaking, highly valuable research. And Aris Thorne was days away from exposing them. The them that stood to lose everything if his findings went public. David Thorne wasn't just a suspect, he was the prime mover, the orchestrator. The motive was clear, a desperate act to protect stolen secrets and prevent a catastrophic public revelation. The elaborate staging, the meticulous sabotage, it wasn't just to hide a killer, it was to erase the reason for the killing. It was to ensure Thorne's exposure never saw the light of day. A knot tightened in my gut. I had found my inside man. But knowing who didn't mean proving it, especially against someone trained to leave no trace. This wasn't just about justice for Aris Thorne, it was about preventing whatever secrets he had uncovered from remaining buried forever. The hunt had just become infinitely more dangerous. Each screen displayed a different facet of the lie I was about to broadcast. My hands, encased in triple-layered nitrile, moved with deliberate slowness across the keyboard, adjusting the parameters of the simulated data. This wasn't just about catching a killer, it was about exposing a rot that ran deeper than I'd initially imagined. Someone had tried to silence me, and that someone knew exactly what Aris Thorne had been working on. I leaned closer to the primary monitor, reviewing the fabricated report. It detailed a supposed breakthrough in identifying a novel catalytic agent, a complex polymer that, according to my fictional findings, left a highly specific, indelible spectral signature when subjected to the precise thermal degradation observed in Thorne's lab. The kicker, this signature was now, supposedly, easily traceable to its source. Only the killer would recognize the true danger of this discovery. I saved the file, marking it with a deceptively innocuous project code, and uploaded it to a secure but subtly accessible network folder, one I knew the victim's brother, the executive, frequently monitored, ostensibly for updates on the investigation. It was a digital fishing line cast into murky waters. Now, all I could do was wait. The waiting was the hardest part. I spent the next few hours meticulously re-examining other evidence, forcing my mind to focus, but a part of me was always listening, always anticipating. I reviewed the security logs for Thorne's lab again, then cross-referenced them with the access records for this very facility. My gaze lingered on the executive's name, appearing far too often for a man supposedly grieving. It was just after midnight when the motion sensor at the clean room's secondary entrance chimed softly, a sound designed to alert only those directly monitoring the space. I didn't move, barely breathed. My eyes, however, flickered to the small, discrete camera feed on a secondary monitor, angled to capture the entrance cloaked in the standard lab-issue coveralls and mask, slipped in. The executive. He moved with a practiced ease that belied his usual corporate demeanor, heading directly for my workstation. His gloved hands went straight for the keyboard, navigating to the recently uploaded file. He was taking the bait. This wasn't just a hunch anymore, it was unfolding exactly as I'd predicted. His intent was clear: destroy the evidence before it could be verified. "What are you doing here so late?" His voice was strained, a thin veneer of indignation. "Just like you," I replied, my voice calm, even.
Working late. Though my work tends to involve preserving evidence, not destroying it.
I gestured to the vial in his hand.
Care to explain that?
He quickly tucked the vial away, attempting a dismissive laugh that died in his throat.
Just a personal project. Nothing to do with this.
I was merely checking on the progress.
This report. It's quite a leap, isn't it? This novel catalytic agent? It is, I conceded, stepping closer, my gaze unwavering.
A very specific leap. One that only someone intimately familiar with Aris Thorne's research and the method of his demise would
find so alarming. I paused, letting the implication hang in the air. The trace polymer, executive. The one we found in Aris's lab.
The one that caused the accident. We also found it at the scene of my own recent malfunction. A very precise, very unique signature. His composure cracked. The mask seemed to fall away, revealing the raw fear beneath. His shoulders slumped, and he slowly, almost imperceptibly, nodded. The confession was already forming in his eyes.
Aris.
They were funding his bioweapon research, twisting his genius for their own ends.
He developed something potent. Too potent. He realized what he'd created, what they intended to do with it.
He threatened to go public, to dismantle their entire operation. His eyes met mine, filled with a desperate, self-serving plea.
They gave me an ultimatum.
Neutralize him, make it look like an accident, or they would make my entire family disappear.
I had no choice, Reed. They left me no choice.
He finally pulled the vial back out, placing it on the workstation. This was to erase any trace of the polymer, to make your breakthrough vanish.
I had to.
The clean room, usually a sanctuary of scientific objectivity, now felt like a confessional.
The trap had sprung.
The trap had sprung, not with a bang, but with the quiet click of handcuffs. David Thorne, his face a mask of calculated resignation, had offered no resistance. The uniformed officers led him away, a figure of corporate power reduced to common criminality. I watched him go, the weight of the last few weeks momentarily lifting, only to be replaced by the immense pressure of what came next. The immediate threat was neutralized, but the ripple effects of Aris Thorne's death and his brother's betrayal were only just beginning to spread. Here, under the unforgiving glare of the overhead lights, every particle, every fiber, told a story. My colleague, a meticulous forensic specialist, moved with practiced precision, cataloging the final pieces of evidence we'd retrieved from Aris Thorne's lab. The modified air purifier, no longer a benign filtration system but a deadly delivery mechanism, lay disassembled on a stainless steel table. Its internal components, usually pristine, bore faint, almost imperceptible traces of the accelerant I'd initially identified. I leaned over a microscope, adjusting the focus on a slide. The microscopic residue, once an enigma, now perfectly matched the unique signature of the compound David Thorne had acquired. The burn patterns, initially dismissed as a tragic accident, suddenly made chilling sense when overlaid with the schematics of the lab's ventilation system. It wasn't an explosion, not truly. It was a carefully orchestrated chemical release, designed to mimic a catastrophic failure, timed to perfection. The evidence, painstakingly gathered and now meticulously analyzed, painted a clear, undeniable picture of premeditated murder.
My internal thoughts drifted to the data logs we'd recovered.
Encrypted, buried deep within Omnicorp's secure servers, they detailed not only David Thorne's illicit acquisition of the accelerant but also a series of highly suspicious financial transactions. These weren't mere corporate espionage payments, they pointed to a deeper network of individuals within the corporation, a shadow cabal intent on weaponizing Aris Thorne's research for their own gain. The scale of it was staggering, far beyond a brother's jealousy. This was corporate ambition, unchecked and lethal. The unraveling began almost immediately. The evidence from the clean room was a hammer blow, dismantling Omnicorp's carefully constructed facade of innovation and responsibility. The first arrests came swiftly, high-profile executives who had benefited directly from David Thorne's scheme, their names now splashed across every news outlet. I watched the unfolding media firestorm from the muted television in the break room, a cup of lukewarm coffee clutched in my hand. Pundits debated, politicians pontificated, and legal experts speculated on the implications. The headlines screamed of betrayal, greed, and scientific hubris. Was humanity ready for such power? Should it even exist? The questions were complex, profound, and now, tragically, tied to a murder. The potential applications, once a distant dream, were now a terrifying reality. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I had solved the murder, unmasked the killer, but the true aftermath, the wider implications, were only just beginning to manifest. The world had just learned what Aris Thorne had discovered, and the knowledge was a Pandora's box, flung open by the greed of a few. My job was to find the truth, to bring justice to the fallen. I had done that. But the truth, in this case, was a volatile substance, capable of both immense good and unimaginable destruction. The quiet tension in the clean room, where every piece of evidence had been meticulously processed, felt like the calm before a storm of global proportions. I stood before a workstation, my gloved hands carefully placing the last of the sealed evidence bags into a collection bin. Each bag, labeled with meticulous precision, represented a piece of the shattered puzzle that had once been Aris Thorne's life. The fragments, a scorched circuit board, a microscopic fiber from a lab coat, a data chip encrypted with his final thoughts, were now catalogued, analyzed, and filed away, their stories told. The silence, once the filters settled into their rhythm, was heavy. It wasn't the silence of completion, but the quiet aftermath of a storm. His motive, laid bare by our findings, was as old as humanity itself, control and profit, amplified by the perilous potential of Aris Thorne's groundbreaking work. He hadn't just wanted to steal the research, he'd wanted to own its very future, twisting its intent for his own gain, regardless of the human cost. My reflection in the glass partition of the clean room showed a man etched with a different kind of fatigue. Aris Thorne's death wasn't just a homicide, it was a profound betrayal, a stark reminder of the ethical precipice upon which scientific progress often balanced. His brilliance, meant for the betterment of the world, had been coveted, corrupted, and ultimately, weaponized by the very people who should have championed it. The true weight of the case settled over me as I walked out of the clean room and into the main forensics bay. It wasn't just the act of murder that disturbed me, but the intricate web of deception spun around it, designed to mimic an accident, to erase the truth. The killer had understood the lab's intricacies, Thorne's habits, and the precise vulnerabilities of his cutting-edge systems. This wasn't a crime of passion, but one of meticulous design, where every variable had been considered, every contingency planned for, except, perhaps, for the microscopic trace, the unusual burn pattern, the details that always spoke to me. I picked up a file from my desk, its cover still bearing the Thorne, Aris designation. The paperwork, the reports, the official closure, they were all there. But closure, I'd learned, was a subjective state. For Aris Thorne, it meant justice, a voice from beyond the grave. And for me, it was another scar, another testament to the enduring struggle between human ingenuity and human depravity. The case had reaffirmed my commitment, though. Each fragment of evidence meticulously examined, each detail painstakingly pieced together, wasn't just about solving a puzzle. It was about standing as a bulwark against the forces that sought to obscure truth, to twist intent, to extinguish lives for selfish gain. It was about ensuring that the silent victims, like Aris Thorne, found their justice. I thought about Thorne's research, the true scope of what he had been on the verge of perfecting. The implications were staggering, capable of reshaping entire industries, perhaps even life itself. It was a power that, in the wrong hands, could bring about unimaginable peril. The corporate executive had seen that power, not as a tool for progress, but as a lever for absolute dominance. The discovery wasn't just who killed Thorne, but the terrifying realization of what he had been working on, and the lengths people would go to control it. That was the real revelation, the lingering tension, the understanding that Thorne's legacy, even with his killer behind bars, was still a double-edged sword hanging over the future. The world was a crucible of innovation and ambition, constantly forging new wonders and, inevitably, new dangers. Aris Thorne's case was a stark reminder that the pursuit of knowledge, while noble, was fraught with ethical landmines. My gaze drifted to a stack of new case files accumulating on a corner of my desk, a fresh batch of mysteries waiting to be unraveled. The top file was marked with a familiar red urgency sticker. Another life, another set of circumstances, another story whispered in the silent language of evidence. The fight for justice was never truly over. It simply shifted, adapting to new forms, new deceptions, new battlegrounds. And I, Reed, would be there, ready to listen.